One time my mom was visiting a friend of hers, and I tagged along. He had a lot of VHS tapes, and he was wanting to give me some, one of them being Batman and Robin. But Biker Mice from Mars really caught my eye. I thought they looked really cool. I remember vividly popping it into my VCR and being enamored with the style and attitude the show had. It really appealed to me. I thought the characters were just so cool. I drank apple juice as a kid and pretended that it was root beer, so I'd be drinking it just like they were in the show. Though as a kid I had no idea that root beer is usually alcohol free, so I genuinely thought they were just chugging pints on the kids show. The show first aired in 1993, so it was a bit before my time, being born in 1998. The series is about three mice from Mars, Throttle, Vinny, and Modo, who manage to survive an attack on their home by the fish-like Plutarchians, but they're being chased down and end up in Chicago where they meet a mechanic named Charlie Davison. Haha, like the bike, get it? But seriously, I love how goofy the names are. A lot of the villains are named after cheese, like the main antagonist Limburger. There's catchphrases all over the place, and it has a really unique feel to it. There's also a very obvious environmental message at the core of the show, with Limburger and his kind taking over the natural resources of other planets, with Earth being his new target. So the gang have to defeat Limburger and find a way to take back their home planet. I've heard great things about the Super Nintendo game, so I figured, as someone who's already a childhood fan of this obscure franchise, why not take a look at all the games? There was a Tiger Electronics handheld game, but there really isn't much to say here, just dodge obstacles and stuff. These were really cheap and wouldn't offer more than a few minutes of distraction, but I figured it was worth mentioning since I know some people collect these things. The first console game was developed and published by Konami for the Super Nintendo. It's an isometric racing game where you choose from 6 different characters with their own stats and weapons. There was supposed to be a Genesis port, but for some reason that never came through. The game looks really good. The colors are vibrant and it does a great job capturing the look of the show. It's cartoony in places and gritty in others. The sprites are large and detailed, and the music is jamming. Sound designer Hideto Inoue had worked on Sunset Riders and Rocket Knight Adventures before this, so I guess it's not surprising that it sounds so good. The game has 3 difficulties, easy, normal, and hard. The controls feel very tight and responsive. Turning is really satisfying. You hold B to accelerate, and you shoot your character's unique projectile weapon with Y. You can nudge yourself to the left or right using the L and R buttons. You can use this to bump into other racers. You can also use L and R while turning to do a power slide. Pulling this off gives you a really nice and satisfying speed boost. You can also brake with the X button, and with the A button you can use special items. So there's a decent amount of complexity to the control scheme, but it's not that hard to get used to, and it's very rewarding to get good at. After completing a lap, your ammo refuels and you can fire more projectiles. You only get a few shots per round, so you gotta be careful when you use them. You also get one random item you can use per lap, being a short speed boost, stopping time, temporary invincibility, an earthquake, or extra money. After getting to the end of a race, you get a set amount of money and points based on how well you did, with the goal of having the most points by the end, similar to a Mario Kart Cup. But here you also keep upgrading your vehicle as you go. The game reminds me a lot of Rock and Roll Racing, which a friend of mine had back in the day. You can also play 2 players, either in normal races or 1v1 races, where it's just you and the other player. There are also battle races, where you can focus on destroying every other racer or just being in first place. If your bike gets destroyed, then that's it, you're out of the game. It's a really fun mode. It's very chaotic. The 2-player options are absolutely great. Something stupid about the PAL version I have to point out is that it's got Snickers branding all over it, so there's just some really awkward product placement in this regional version. I don't mind some product placement in some games. I think Crazy Taxi does it fine, considering that you're dropping people off at familiar restaurant chains and stuff. Or Pikmin, where it kinda adds to the immersion of the world, being this small creature finding possessions from humans. But in this game, it's incredibly awkward and it feels so off. Just seeing giant Snickers branding, I don't like it. Many of the people who worked on this game had worked on titles like Turtles in Time and Contra, and the course designer Shinya Inoue would actually go on to be the background artist for Shenmue 1 and 2. Anyways, this game is really great and well worth the money. Thankfully it's not super expensive, it's satisfying and fun to play, it looks and sounds great. I can easily recommend this one. It's mechanically satisfying, and there's a really good amount of stages in this game too. It's the kind of game I can just see myself booting up randomly just to play a couple of rounds. It's really addicting. The final season of the show aired in 1996. After this, the franchise remained dormant for a while. 10 years later, the show would get a brand new 4th season, this time rocking a slightly more angular art style and using more CGI. Here, the mice are fighting together to free Mars from the Catatonian invaders. I remember Carbine and Throttle's relationship well, and as a kid I just really wanted them to be together and be happy. It's really funny to look back on, it's so sweet. Carbine Carbine is the leader of the Freedom Fighters and remains on Mars while Throttle, Moto, and Vinny go to Earth to seek help from someone who made a machine called a Regenerator. The villains want to use this to destroy Mars, while the mice want to use it to create water, because this machine can change the properties of any materials that it hits. It's really cool that the show got to have a revival like this. Not just a reboot, but a show that actually continues where the last one left off. 10 years later too. That's a long time without any more content, and then suddenly it's just back on air. It's really cool, even if it didn't run for long. The first game based on this reboot series is for the PlayStation 2. It was developed by Crate Studios, who hadn't done a whole lot of work before this. They had assisted with making additional assets for a few games, but the only games they had developed themselves were American Chopper 1 and 2. They're licensed games based on reality TV shows, and neither of them were reviewed well. It seems Game Factory was in charge of finding a really cheap developer that I guess just needed to have some kind of experience making a game with motorcycles. This doesn't exactly bode too well, but let's give them a shot. We get a CGI opening cutscene explaining the basic premise of the game, and we jump into mission 1 where we go to get some food while going through a basic tutorial. As we can see in the menus, there's a lot of different upgrades to buy, but I'm curious to see how the game feels, and it's not great. Moving left or right just feels sort of stiff. The bike feels really weightless. You can attack while on the bike and boost and wheelie, and if you boost while doing a wheelie, you'll jump. It's a cool idea and it makes sense with these characters. I just wish it felt better. Also, after completing the tutorial mission, the music just cuts out instantly and it feels really awkward. Everything has a somewhat cheap feel to it. There's also combat missions where you're on foot beating up bad guys, and it's just as hollow as anything else in the game. There are a lot of cutscenes with the cast reprising their roles, though the animations are pretty rough. The movements are pretty stiff and robotic, but at least I can commend the effort of trying to make it feel like playing the show. So you keep taking on driving and combat missions, rescue the creator of the Regenerator, and take down the Catatonians. When destroying their base, the Regenerator is also destroyed in the process. The game ends with Throttle explaining that they still have to work hard to make Mars inhabitable again. The game is barely 2 hours long, and there isn't much here in the way of additional content. Honestly, it's hard to even comment on this game because it's just so nothing. It's just nothing. It's the worst thing a game can be. It's boring. It's one of the most boring games I've ever played. I did play it at a friend's house as a kid, but I can't remember anything about it. I just vaguely remember seeing the characters on screen and thinking, oh, that's cool. But I'm not surprised I couldn't remember anything because this game just sucks. Let's hope the DS game can be more interesting. This game is made by Full Fat Productions, whose specialty is handheld games based on licensed properties. They worked on many games on the Game Boy Advance, like Beyblade, Justice League, Billy and Mandy, and more. This is their second DS title, the first being Sims 2 Pets. Jumping into the game, we get a pretty neat looking low poly 3D city with a theme song playing in the background. There's a lot more flash and flare to the menus this time, so it makes me hopeful it's at least going to be somewhat decent. So we select one of the main 3 characters, and we get a pretty nice looking comic style cutscene explaining the story, and we're thrown into the first mission, which is a race against time to get to a crashed ship. Surprisingly, there's no tutorial, so I failed the first time just figuring out the controls, but once I got it, I'm happy to say it feels a lot nicer than the PS2 game. The bike has some real nice weight to it, and drifting actually feels satisfying. The boost is a lot faster here too, and there's just more stuff in the environment to jump over or to blow up. Making the missions timed is also a decent way to make them more exciting than the PS2 game, because that game was way too easy. This feels much faster, smoother, and fun already. Then we get to a side-scrolling beat-em-up section, and you know what? It's alright. Like the other game, you get a few simple combos to pull off, but here it just feels much smoother and more satisfying. There's also a little bit of platforming involved, as well as dodging obstacles like bombs and stuff, which gives the stages a more frantic and chaotic energy, making them a lot more exciting than the PlayStation 2 game's combat sections. They do also have a mechanic for jumping between the background and foreground, but it's kinda awkward and clunky and it doesn't really add much. But hey, I can appreciate the effort of trying to make these missions more interesting. Though this one section is a bit awkward, you gotta throw bombs back at these guys by pressing Y, but the time you have before they blow up is a bit too slim, and they don't throw bombs at the same time, so it can be annoying to throw them back. Next up, we're introduced to bike combat. Your mission is still timed, but every regular enemy you beat nets you another 5 seconds, which is a cool mechanic. It's satisfying to take them down and get some precious time back, similar to Gamma's missions in Sonic Adventure. After catching up with the enemy, the Regenerator is destroyed, so now they head to Earth to find its creator, and here we get even more beat-em-up missions. And it turns out that this is actually most of the game, like 90% of it. That's pretty disappointing to me. Again, they're not bad, bad. I already pointed out some stuff I like about them, but the driving is so much fun, I just keep wanting to go back to that. That feels like it's what this game should mostly be about, but it seems that in this 2-hour long game, maybe 20 minutes of it are spent driving. It's so much fun, and it's a huge shame to see it be such a small part of the game. The beat 'em up sections aren't bad, but there's some stuff that's annoying. Like these grenade enemies that keep popping up, and the charging enemies can be really awkward to fight. Their attacks are so hard to avoid, and I found these instant death spikes to be kinda cheap. Here it takes up like half the screen, and if you die once you gotta restart the whole level. Thankfully none of the missions are too long or anything, but it can be a little annoying to play. You can get to the end of a stage and you just accidentally fall down a pit and gotta redo like 2 minutes of punching over again. But I'll give them this, there's a good amount of variety in these levels. You go through all kinds of different locations and generally looks very good. I especially love how the water looks, it's very pleasing to the eye. The graphics aren't bad at all for a licensed DS title. I do start to get pretty tired of the beat 'em up sections as they go on, but at least they try to spice things up by doing things like giving you guns to shoot, very short turret sections that don't overstay their welcome, making you dodge certain obstacles. They try to keep things interesting, and while it still gets pretty boring after a bit, it's a lot more fun than the PS2 game. Overall, this game is decent. If there had been way more driving missions, less beat 'em up missions, and some enemies had been tweaked, I would say this is a great game. But as it stands, it's not bad at all. Way better than the PS2 game, that's for sure. The last game came out in 2015, 7 years after the show had been relevant in any way. It's once again based on the 90s cartoon, and it's, well, I think you can tell just by looking. It's slow, janky, and unimpressive. This is the official gameplay trailer of the game. It's as good as the game is gonna look, and it looks really fucking bad. It looks really boring. I'm not surprised no one talks about it. Really, the most interesting thing about this game is the fact that it exists at all. And that's all the games from the series. I wouldn't mind seeing the show come back again. It's edgy in a silly, cartoony kind of way, and it has such a charm to it. If you're interested in the games, the Super Nintendo title is well worth a try. It's genuinely great. The DS game is pretty decent, and if you're particularly interested in the reboot, it's not a bad pickup. The PS2 game doesn't have much to offer and really wasn't very fun, and the mobile and Tiger Electronic games just don't bother, unless you're one of those people who really love collecting Tiger games, in which case knock yourself out. But I heard this is kind of a rare one, so I don't know if it's worth it. It's been a real blast for me getting back into this franchise, and I really enjoyed my time making this video, even if there were some real rough patches here. Anyways, thanks for watching.